So first, the reading from Emmett Fox.
Okay. Okay, the title from Emmett Fox is What Does God Expect? As children of the Most High, we have a divine heritage and therefore a right to expect that God will take care of us in every way. The Bible is full of promises as to what God will do for his children. But perhaps Jesus put it the most plainly when he said, "What man is there of you whom if his son asks for bread, will he give him a stone? Or if he asks a fish, will give him a serpent? If ye then, being evil, know how to give good gifts unto your children, how much more shall your Father which is in heaven give good things to them that ask him?" And that's from Matthew's Gospel, chapter 7, verse 9 to 11. So you have divine right to expect all these good things from God. But what does God expect of us? Well, God has a right to expect that we will put him first in our hearts. And then God expects us to have a lively faith. Faith in itself is a reliance upon the goodness of God. And lastly, God expects us to go to him in prayer as a son who knows that even before he has asked, the loving Father has answered.
So on the way back from our vacation, I found myself listening to a discussion of finding peace in the midst of difficulty. And since then, I've had two other reference points sort of show up. And so what I want to do is sort of explore what I was hearing. The idea being that our objective in life, ideally, is to live a life of joy and happiness, of peace, of contentment in connection with the divine. But that's awfully hard to do. And from the radio show, from the other pieces of information that have come by, I want to sort of share some thoughts. Please understand that this is coming from I'll say a partly baked idea. I'm still exploring it, but it felt like the right thing to talk about today, to share. It is so easy to lose track of what our life should be, of our life goals here on this earth. Whether it's, as was discussed in the NPR story, a fellow who essentially broke his back and was in pain, or whether it's going through day to day with what we'll call the natural stresses of life. How do we get from that? I titled it Achieving Joy in the Moment. How do we get to joy in each moment? Well, first of all, to get to joy in one moment is important enough. The point was made in another conversation that we can be passive and sort of hope we find some joy, or we can intentionally go after joy. And by joy, I'm using that as a single word for the whole ball of wax of joy, happiness, contentment, clear sense of connection, of interaction with the divine. I'm just going to use the word joy because I don't want to keep using all those other words, and you'll get what I mean. As I was thinking about this, I was reminded of the incident reported in the Bible where there's a bunch of little kids sort of running around this guy Jesus, and the apostles are trying to shoo them off. And Jesus stops and says, "Let the little children come to me." What is it that little children have that we tend to lose as we move into adulthood? It's the ease of living in joy, in the moment of happiness. And yeah, there's going to be a little unhappiness right at the moment because Johnny just fell and skinned his knee. But 5 minutes later, Johnny's forgotten all about it because now he's in happiness again. In comparison, think how we as people tend to live, where our fixation more often than not is on the sad, the grief. In transactional analysis, they say there are 4 basic feelings: mad, sad, glad, and scared. And if any other feeling, they say, is simply a combination of some sense of the 2 of them or 3 of them. Well, we tend to emphasize the low vibration ones, mad, sad, scared. Whereas where we need to be is the high vibration of glad. Phyllis showed me a book with some readings that were, or writings that were really appropriate. We were made for these times by Kaira Jewel Lingle. She is a former Buddhist monk, I believe it is, associated with Thich Nhat Hanh, as I understand it. And she wrote about her own struggle as she was finding she didn't fit as a nun. And I'm going to share some of that with you. She had a couple of quotes to start in the chapter that I'm going to read from that are relevant here, I believe. From June Jordan, whomever that is, I hadn't bothered to look it up. She says, "I must undertake to love myself and to respect myself, as though my very life depends upon self-love and self-respect." Well, if we have self-love and self-respect, does that not mean that we choose the happy road, the joy road, the uplifted road? And then from Thich Nhat Hanh, and I have no idea if I'm saying it correctly, from the book How to Walk, he wrote, "Most of us walk without change, yet we aren't free." I'm sorry, without chains, yet we aren't free. We're tethered to regret and sorrow from the past. We return to the past and continue to suffer. The past is a prison, but now you have the key to unlock the door and arrive in the present moment. And notice what he's emphasizing, the present moment. You breathe in, you bring your mind home to your body, you make a step. You arrive in the here and the now. And then the writer, Lingo, goes on and writes, "In my final years as a nun in the Plum Village community, I went through a time of real existential crisis about what I should be doing in life. I was considering whether to leave the monastery, which was a huge question to be holding. I had spent my whole adult life as a monastic. Contemplating a future outside the monastery, I could see there was no clear path ahead of me. No job, no relationship, no community, no place to live, no security at all. And yet I couldn't stay in the monastic robes just because it was comfortable and known. Something was calling to me that I could not ignore." She goes on, "At the time I was living in our center in Germany, where we were about to host 2 large retreats of about 1,000 people each. Previously, I had been quite involved in helping to run those annual retreats, but now I felt I couldn't manage to even be present during the retreats because of how confused I was feeling about my path. So I asked my sisters if I could go to Plum Village, our monastery in France, during the all busyness of these retreats. They did not feel it was a good idea and requested that I talk to Tay, the director, directly. I went to Tay and said, I have no space inside, and I cannot see myself staying here for these retreats. It's too much for me. He heard me out quietly, which he would always do, and then said, yes, I hear all that you are saying, and you can stay here. In other words, he said, you are capable of staying. I pressed on, but it's so tight inside, I'm totally up against a wall. He replied, this is exactly the time when you take refuge in the basic practices of mindful sitting, breathing, and being aware of each step. And this was something that the speaker on NPR spoke about. He had severely damaged his back, and it took major surgery to give him any hope of becoming pain-free again. And then it took physiotherapy. And during the physiotherapy, the therapist said, you know, your back isn't hurting now. Your mind is used to hurting, and we have to help it change its mind. This, to me, is a critical point for each of us. How much of our tension, of our distress, of our lack of joy in each moment is habit? I can't answer for you. I can answer for myself. I'm not as bad as I used to be. Time was, back before I started healing, every moment was high tension, was terror. I'm out of that habit now. But I monitor myself. And if I find myself in a low energy, mad, sad, or scared, I watch. If I get through it in a day or 2 days, I'm not going to worry about it. But if it's longer than that, then I'm concerned that I'm getting in the habit. What Robert Schuller called stinking thinking. Now, he was talking about poverty. We're talking about living in the moment with the divine. So this fellow who'd had the broken back was still in pain, learned to enjoy each moment he walked. He had been a mountain climber. Now he was glad that he could even walk, to say nothing of learning again to walk pain-free. That's the obstacle we place in front of ourselves, one of many. From another source, what is our obstacle to living joyous in the moment? Anxiety, fear, worry. Worry about the past, worry about the future. Reliving painful things from the past. I still do that. I don't know when I'll finally be finished with letting all that go. But every once in a while, wham, I remember something that was really painful or that I really screwed up. Each of us has to go through the process, or can choose to go through the process. I know some people who will never. I'm acquainted with a widower. His wife's been dead, if I remember correctly, 35 years, more or less. He still grieves every day. He's living the grief. That's his ongoing pain. He's in the habit of pain, which means that there's a significant loss in the ability to live in the joy, to live in the peace of God, the connection with God that is our right. That's what Emmett Fox is talking about. The divine offers it to us, even without our asking. But we must be prepared to walk in the place of peace, to let go of the lower energy feelings, the pain from the past, the worry about the future, so that we can, like a little child, live joyously in this moment. Each of us has that capacity. Each of us, should we choose, can choose to live this moment, the next moment, in joy, in peace, being loved, in God's love, connected with the divine in all ways. It's our heritage. It's what we were given as a gift even before we came in here. And it is ours, should we choose it. And that's what the Buddhists are part of, and teaching us in part. That living in peace is ours by choice, if we choose it. Just as the fellow with the broken back had the choice to continue being in the habit of hurting, or to find the transcendence beyond hurting. This author talks about being aware when fear is running the show, when we're running fear with fear. But that, she writes, we can stop. We have the chance to touch into something deeper and happier, and I'll say more God-centered. So the question to consider this week, when you find yourself experiencing one of the lower emotions, less of the lower frequency emotions, you can ask yourself, am I prepared to walk past this, to let it flow through me and out the back? That's something that one of the belief patterns we can install with Lift. I let the present pain flow through me and then be gone, to be lost in the dust of time. What children do, they're here, the pain's here, it's gone, and they're happy again. Which means we can put ourselves on a different platform. If you think of it, you're on a platform here where joy is the norm. Connection with the divine is the norm. Being loved and loving is the norm. And if some rain, something acidic, something untoward happens to land on the platform, we can acknowledge it, but we can also let it drop off the platform into the dust of time. By making this choice, we can move to a happier life. Maybe I should say the happiest of lives available to us on this plane. And if we're having difficulty making the choice, have a conversation with the divine, have a conversation with a spiritual guide, have a conversation with a competent therapist or a lift-on therapist. Do what it takes so that you ultimately have the permission and the capability to let whatever those pains are just move aside. What's another argument for doing it? The last 2 weeks, people that I have an acquaintance with and whom I know from conversations have had utterly horrendous childhoods, maximized abuse of all sorts. Both are in hospital. They've had They have developed ongoing illnesses. When one gets well, another one hits. When one gets well, another one hits. Maybe multiples of them hit. And I keep thinking to myself, I think of that ACEs test, that adverse childhood experiences that Kaiser Permanente Foundation created, where it had people identify what kinds of adverse childhood experiences they had, quantify it, and then they can correlate that with the types of illnesses and the severity of physical illnesses they are going to have in adulthood. And I see these two and think, they're experiencing the result of having had so many adverse childhood experiences. If Phyllis will remind me, I'll send you a copy of that form if you want to try taking it yourself. Might be eye-opening. So, having said all this, I want to go back to Emmett Fox and reread a couple pieces of it to remind us how it all fits together. He wrote, "As children of the Most High, we have a divine heritage and therefore a right to expect that God will take care of us in every way." Now that should put paid to mad, sad, and scared, if we are good at doing it. And then, so you have a divine right to expect all these good things from God. What are the good things? Joy, happiness, loving and being loved, being surrounded by people who care about you, feeling and living the connection in God, of God, with God, and instinctively knowing inside and beyond your intellect that you are God, you are of God, you're part and parcel, absolutely. And then he says, but what does God expect of us? God has the right to expect that we will put him first in our hearts. Okay, what does that mean? You stop putting in anxiety, you stop putting in worry ahead of him, her, it. You take the lower energy feelings and set them aside so you are clear to be connected and putting the divine ahead of all the troubles. Then he goes on, God expects us to have a lively faith. So are you in the habit of conversing with the divine every day? I know in a recent talk, I talked about the Talmudic Rebbes who believe that every morning when you wake up, you give thanks to the divine for having returned life and breath for you, because they believe that sleep is a small death. I try to do it. Some mornings I manage, some mornings I don't. Some evenings I give thanks for the day to all the angels, to all the powers that serve the divine. Sometimes I don't. But I'm getting better at it. And then he goes on, faith in itself is a reliance upon the goodness of God. And lastly, he says, God expects us to go to him in prayer as a child who knows that even before they have asked, the loving Father has answered. So all other things aside, if you continue to find yourself bedeviled by the lower energy feelings, before you do anything else, ask the loving Father to help you heal. Back when I was diagnosed crazy, you'll never get well. That's what I did. Walking out of that shrink's office, being told that I was incurable. God, I don't know what to do. Can you help me out? Sister Pepper used to say, you don't have to be like those evangelists and pray morning, evening, and night. You ask God once, he takes care of you. Remember that. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't say thank you morning and night. To me, that's my choice, not because I have to please God, but I want to make sure that I remember the gratitude of all the good that the divine has given me. For I'm in a place doing a work. If you'd asked me 30, 40 years ago, I would have had no idea. I am in a happiness, generally speaking, that I could only have dreamt of 50 years ago. And I couldn't dream of it because I didn't know it was even possible. Each of us can do that. And we as a community, as each of us grows into living God, can lift this community to a higher and higher place, to spread even more love through the world. And yay for that. So that's what I have to say today. Anyone have some contributions to add to it?
You and I are on the same wavelength. I've been working on a blog today about how we are not used to feeling good. And I keep thinking of it like we're trying to unthaw. We're trying to practice, we have to practice a little bit of happiness and then a little bit of happiness and then a little bit of happiness. So I loved your talk. And I think it is key. I think the way we feel is key to how our lives are, how good they are, or how unhappy they are. So there. That's all.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're right on. Thank you, Brian. It was that oracle of the time, as always, at perfect moment. Thank you very, very much. It couldn't have been any better, any different. It was absolutely primo. And I might just add, watch out for boredom for anybody who feels that way, because life will definitely change it for you, whether you think you chose it or not. Watch out for boredom.
Okay. Thank you.
It is its own reaction. Thank you.
Thank you, God, for having shepherded us through the last week, for having provided more good to each of us, more guidance to each of us, for having helped us open up more to your divine love and the love of others here on this earth. Thank you for enabling us to grow in you, to grow through you, to automatically work to lift the world up. Thank you for creating miracles in our lives and enabling us to touch others in ways that help them to experience miracles in their own lives. For all the good you've bestowed upon us, dear God, we say thank you, thank you, thank you. And we all say, Amen.